I'm Jenny Carlson.
I'm Barry Trammell. Welcome to the Jenni and Berry Show. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. It helps us. It helps you. College basketball season finally has arrived. Here in the second week of March, with the conference tournaments leading to Selection Sunday, the sport finally springs to life.
We'll talk about that and lots more, but first we want to say thanks to these sponsors for supporting the Jenni and Berry Show. MidFirst Bank, Next Gen Roofing, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, 988, Oklahoma's Mental Health Lifeline, the Oklahoma Ford Dealers Association. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Two Fellas Movers. With over 20 years experience, Two Fellas Moving Company has pretty much moved it all. If you're moving in Oklahoma, make sure to call the fellas. Visit twofellas.com for your free quote today.
I feel like Steve Martin in The Jerk, Jacko. It's March, and you know what that means. The new college basketball season is here. The new college basketball season is here.
Hey, I think college basketball may actually be here. Not the new season, the actual season, Barry.
You're right. You're right. The first games were played 4 months ago, but nothing much matters other than nothing really matters in the dreaded regular season. It's finally over. Conference tournament week is here. NCAA tournament is next week. So, after 4 months of just humdrum basketball, how excited are you about tournament week?
Yeah, it's definitely the start of the March Madness. I mean, it's not the NCAA tournament. That's the big show. But obviously, conference tournament week has a lot to do with who gets in. There'll be some teams playing for their lives in conference tournaments. I think we're going to see OU really having to play hard. If we're looking for a local team to ascribe that to, they're going to need to, I think, win one at least in Kansas City to make sure that they're into the tournament. Because here's the thing, Barry, you never know what's going to happen. You get some mid-major unexpectedly losing in a conference tournament that deserves an NCAA tournament bid. They may have to get a bid where some team that's down the tiers might not. So you want to set up yourself as best you can. So lots of teams looking to do that during conference tournament week.
Yeah, I like tournament week, particularly the Big 12. That's what we know most about, but the other tournaments are good too on the major level. But then the mid-majors, some of which, have already ended, but the bulk come this week, and that's just fabulous basketball. It takes you back to high school, one and done situation, and everybody's got a chance. If you can get into your conference tournament championship game, win, maybe pull an upset, you're in March Madness, you celebrate like it's VE Day. So I think it's, I think it's just an incredible week for college basketball, a sport that is really, really struggling to capture the nation's fancy before March. And you get to March and everything changes. The brackets, the anticipation of the selections, everything that goes with March Madness. So the sport really does come alive right here in the month of March. It's as far as I can tell, it's the only sporting event that really has it's the sporting event most associated with a particular month, particular time of the year. Baseball summer forever, but this is 1 month, and we've pinned it. It's March Madness, and that's an apt description. So I think it's going to get the juices flowing. Yeah. But it's sort of sad that we've had to go 4 months with a sport and then start paying attention. How much attention have you paid to the regular season this year?
Not very much. I mean, I know at least, watch the local guys, OU, OSU, the women's teams from both as much as I can. But beyond that, very little. I mean, I'm obviously aware of how tough the Big 12 is. We knew it was going to be with the addition of 4 new teams, and one in specific being Houston. They've been fantastic on the men's side, Calvin Sampson and his bunch. So I'm aware of it, but I'm not sitting down to watch college basketball. And I used to, Barry. And, as we talk about this, I think it's worth mentioning that there are some places in the country where all of this is going to sound like a foreign concept. places like Lawrence, Kansas, and Lexington, Kentucky, and Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, places where college basketball is the thing. And when it starts, it's the greatest thing ever. And when it finishes, it feels like a death in the family. So in those places, what we're saying, again, it's probably not registering very well. But in a lot of other places around the country, this is going to sound very familiar, that college basketball just does not have the sizzle it once has. I mean, Barry, you earlier this year had a chance to reminisce a little bit about the Billy Tubbs era at Oklahoma and how much of a foreign concept that now seems. The scoring that Billy and his guys had. I mean, you just don't see that style of free-flowing, fun, unencumbered basketball in the college game. And it really feels like a slog, teams not struggling to get to 20 points and a half. I mean, does anybody really enjoy watching that? I sure don't.
No, but you know what? When you were talking about, looking back on the Billy Ball days, Cowboys of a similar generation look back longingly at those wonderful winter nights in Gallagher-Iba, where Eddie Sutton's teams, now Eddie's teams could score. They would often, win a game 80-something to 70-something. But they also won their share in the 50s. And even if it was a defensive masterpiece and not a lot of scoring, that still drew attention, that drew eyeballs, that created excitement. So it's not just the scoring. The scoring helps, but something else is amiss in this sport. I don't know what it is. When you think about the big stories of college basketball to this point, well, let me ask you, who's the number one college? What player is the number one college basketball attraction in America this season? Who's the most popular college basketball player this season?
Well, I mean, it's Caitlin Clark, obviously.
Caitlin Clark. It's a female because she's established. She's been playing a long time. She's been incredibly productive. The men's stars come and go. Yeah. Sometimes, no more than a year. Hardly ever do you have a 2-year guy that you can follow. Mm-hmm. So the personalities have become more prevalent on the women's side because they have some longevity. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. College basketball on the men's side is hurting just from an appeal to the public. Basketball is a relational sport. It's a sport where you get to know guys because you see their faces on television or at the arena. They're not hidden. You're not far away. You're close to the court in most cases. And you don't make a connection when they're only there a year. Sometimes I have to remember who's playing for OU and OSU. I try to watch every game, and I still have trouble remembering, that's, whoever. That's, Keller at OSU, or that's McCollum at OU, whoever it might be. It's just hard to get a grasp on connecting with these ball teams.
Yeah, really difficult. Even the top level teams, I mean, the transfer portal and the churn on the roster, it's hard to keep up with. So I think you had something a week or so ago that said right now in college basketball, there are 21 players who have been on the roster at OU or OSU that are still playing college basketball. I mean, that's just a mind-blowing number, but that's pretty normal, quite honestly, to think that a Power 5 team could have 10 or so players that were on the roster at some point still in college basketball. I think that's now the norm. It's really hard to build up any connection with these teams. Again, I go back to those places where college basketball is big regardless. Kentucky, North Carolina, Kansas, those sorts of places. They don't care the names on the back. They'll cheer no matter what for what's on the front. But everywhere else, if you can't build that connection, it's really hard to feel invested in teams, especially in a league like the Big 12 where, going 500 is a major accomplishment. But from the fan perspective, is that really going to draw you in, a 500 team with a lot of guys you don't have any idea who they are? So I think that's a real issue. And, obviously, if you win the transfer game and you build a great team, like say what K-State did a year ago, they don't care that these guys are new. They're going to go watch. But Not everybody can do that. And so it's really difficult when you don't have those carryover players. Things like senior day, Barry. I mean, it used to be that senior day was a big deal. Now, I don't even know how teams do senior days without sort of a wink and a nod. Like, these guys haven't been around, most of them, for their whole career, or even a few years, that are doing senior days nowadays.
How can you even tell who a senior is?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you're a senior, but you got another year left. I mean, we used to call those people redshirt juniors, but not anymore. Yeah, the eligibility status is a mess. But, here's another problem. Even if you get a little bit acclimated to your team, OU, OSU, Texas Tech, TCU, doesn't matter who, look at what's in the leagues around you. I mean, in the old days, you're too young to remember much of this, but in the old days, I mean, the Big Eight, I knew every player in the Big Eight.
Right.
And then it gets to the Big Ten, the Big 12, and then eventually 10 teams in the Big 12, and you still could get you could get your arms around it. Now, for this season, we've got the Big 12 is 14 schools, including 4 schools that are in their first year in the conference. Next year, the 16-team Big 12 is going to have 8 schools only that have not been in the league more than 1 year.
Right.
OU's going to the SEC, going to be in a league with Texas and the 14-team SEC. We're not going to know any of those college basketball players. Not great incentive to learn them. So not only, think of the villains that, I mean, you're a KU gal. Yeah. You can remember the Missouri villains as better than anybody.
Yeah.
The Longhorn villains. Villains is one of the things that helps make the sport, the rivalries. That's cool. You don't know who the bad guy is anymore. So it's one big mess. And only one thing saves it every year, and that's the month of March. And, why do you think the tournaments in March have such a salvation effect on us and remind us, oh, yeah, this is fantastic?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. And, frankly, it's stuff that the NCAA tournament started to develop well before all this transfer portal stuff. I mean, it's the Cinderellas. It's the small schools. It's the schools that you're not exactly sure where they are, but for a day or maybe a little longer, you get to watch them slay the teams of note. To me, that's really where March Madness is something that you don't see anywhere else. I mean, you don't see it in the pro sports, the playoffs, NFL. Occasionally, you have kind of an underdog that will win, but the NFL there's so much parity in the NFL. Team number 1 and team down at the bottom are not going to be that different. So I don't even know if that fully equates. But, March Madness, we've seen it even just here in Oklahoma City, Barry. We haven't had a regional here for a long time. But when you think about the regional upsets that we've seen in Oklahoma City, just, one place over the years, whether you're talking about the Valparaiso Miracle, whether you're talking about Rhode Island beating Kansas or Bucknell beating Kansas or Northern Iowa beating Kansas.
Everybody
is not a
beating
good
Kansas.
place for Kansas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. It is great. And when you started talking about, the little guy, the Cinderella, I immediately thought of St. Peter's, which knocked off Kentucky and got within a game of the Final Four, playing in an urban gym that looks more like an old church gym, broken windows. You compare that to Rupp Arena and the millions and millions and millions that Kentucky spends on basketball, and yet St. Peter's took them out. That's the kind of thing that just juices March Madness and just gets us all going. And if you're on the wrong side of it, if you're Virginia losing to Maryland, Baltimore County, that's a bummer. But let me tell you, America is celebrating UMBC. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful event that sort of is the microcosm of America. The little guy can still make it. You're not defined by the class in which you're born. So it has all kinds of great elements. And the one and done situation, if St. Peter's played a series against Kentucky, best of 3, best of 5, best of 7, goodbye St. Peter's. Yeah. But it's best of 1. And what a format. And the bracket is great. People picking their teams, filling up that bracket. Just so much about this sport captivates America. in this solitary month of March.
It's also the single moments. Yes, the upsets and the Cinderellas, but you think about the buzzer beaters and the game winners and even the idiosyncrasies of teams that, again, we've probably never heard of or haven't thought much about, that suddenly we think, oh my gosh, that's so charming. I mean, you just think about when Bob Hoffman's at Mercer and the way that their bench was when they scored their big upset of Duke. I think people you fall in love with these little moments and, these personalities and these individuals that maybe we didn't know anything about. That Northern Iowa team that knocked off Kansas here, Ali Farouk Manesh. I mean, a name that we're never going to forget, but we never even knew before that day. So just those little moments of things that people keep coming back to and coming back to. It's just, it's charming in a way that, most of these bazillion-dollar sporting events don't have anymore.
Yeah, no, it's just fantastic, and it's the best postseason in sport. I think we can all agree to that. NFL probably gives it a run for its money, but just a wonderful celebration of basketball, whether it's Butler or whether it's UConn, doesn't matter whether it's the biggest, the underdog, doesn't matter. And the one thing that's great, Jacko, is the modern age, the portal, the NIL, seems to be helping the little guy.
Agreed.
We had a Final Four last spring that included Florida Atlantic and San Diego State, plus the University of Miami, which is a team that we forget even has a basketball team, even though they're in the ACC. So just a really cool format and a really often really cool results. And we get upsets and intriguing things happening all the time. Now, the one thing that's interesting to me is we focus on the men's tournament because it's so high profile, but at roughly the same time, the NCAA women's tournament is conducted on the same weeks, just mostly different days. It has not captured the fancy of America as much as the men. It's gaining in popularity, and we talked about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and the whole crowd of women seem to have the better personalities in college basketball. Do you see the NCAA women's bracket, March Madness female version, continuing to grow and eventually getting some of this marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about women's basketball that hasn't happened yet that we've talked about with the men's tournament, the Cinderellas, the unexpected stories of the little guy beating slaying the giant. Those are not as numerous in the women's tournament. I don't know if we may see the flattening out of the women's side because of the portal, because of NIL. Is that coming? Could that maybe get to the point where you do start to see some of these lower, whether it's group of 5 or even below that, programs that can go toe-to-toe and beat some of these other programs? But it seems like the chasm is still pretty wide. I mean, I was watching South Carolina and LSU play a regular season game earlier this year. And just thinking about OU going into the SEC and competing against those two programs, which again, if you're thinking about who's the ultimate programs in the women's game right now, those are 2 of the 5 in my mind. So that's a high bar. But still, you see those 2 and you think, how could OU even compete? And they just won a Big 12 championship. But that just says to me that the likes of, whatever the St. Peter's, UMBC equivalent in the women's game would be, you're just not going to see them able to pull the upset as often. One has been beaten in the women's game. It happened well before the men's tournament had its UMBC, but you just don't see the regularity of the 10 seed, the 12 seed, one of those types of teams, making a deep run, not just winning a game, but going far into the tournament. So to me, that's sort of the frontier that's left to be crossed for the women's game. I think that, like you say, the stars of the women's game are bigger stars, bigger individuals, better stories than on the men's side. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese. There's numerous players that, I would say may carry as much or more than any of the men's players in the college game. But you just don't have the little guy scoring the upset in the women's tournament yet.
The one thing I would like to see the women do, they tried it, used it a while, got away from it. Maybe it's time to come back, though, is go away from home courts in the first 2 rounds. That's why I think we see fewer upsets. If you made St. Peter's play Kentucky in Rupp Arena, Kentucky's probably going to win it. But the women require the little schools to do that, to go to the bigger schools and try to win. That's the one thing I'd like to see changed in the women's tournament. But we're headed for a new frontier next year. The conference tournaments always, they're sort of like the appetizer. They're the fried mushrooms before the big country pizza. So
give me the mushrooms, by the way. I don't want to skip the mushrooms.
No. So we love it. We love the Big 12 tournament and the various conference tournaments. And we talked about that. Next year, we're going to have divided attention, divided loyalties. Yeah. We have been accustomed for several years, come and go, of OU, OSU, men and women, all 4 teams playing in the Big 12 tournament in the same week.
Yeah.
And next week, this year, they've separated the weeks. The women's started last week in Kansas City on Thursday, and then we'll conclude on Tuesday night with the championship game, which is when the men's tournament starts. So it got elongated. Next year, we're going to have these four teams playing in 3 different cities on 4 different dates. OU in the SEC tournament, men and women, separate cities, separate times. The Big 12 tournament, men and women, separate times, same city. It's just going to be expanded. It's not going to be as condensed. Yeah. It's, I think it's going to be much harder to keep up with. I really do.
No, I would agree with that. And I do think it's going to be interesting to have, sort of the experience of what is SEC basketball? What are those conference tournaments like? Because there's been a lot of focus on SEC football for good reason, but, we sort of have a sense of Big 12 basketball tournaments. The Iowa State people show up because they're basketball crazy and they're there for the men and the women. Kansas fans show up in droves for the men. K-State fans show up in droves for, their men's team because of the geography. So you sort of, even when you're not there, you can picture what it's like. But I've never been to an SEC basketball tournament. I have no idea. I assume Kentucky fans on the men's side are everywhere. I assume LSU fans and South Carolina fans on the women's side are everywhere. But past that, I really have no idea. Like, what are the SEC tournaments like? So I can't really put myself there. And I think a lot of fans will be that way. It's just these teams are going out and they're going to places that you don't really have that connection to. So I think that's going to take some time. But in some ways, it means, sort of more games, more teams, more potential to see these teams. I mean, heck, we could have a year that if all 4 programs got good, they could contend for conference championships and all potentially win because they're playing for different conference titles. So, cool little tidbits like that, but it will be different. I mean, we're going to have to figure out what is life like in the basketball world of the SEC.
Yeah, it's maybe we'll love it. I don't know. I know this. March never fails to deliver.
Yeah.
In college basketball. February, January, December and November, just awful. But you get to March, and the basketball gets really good really fast.
Definitely. Yeah, I can't wait. I think we're going to have to be content, though, in March Madness with OU and OSU men and women. OSU men and women unlikely to scratch it. How far do you think those 2 teams could go, Barry? How long are we going to be watching March Madness with a local flavor?
Well, the good thing about it is everybody can go farther than you think, because it's not a quality test. It's sort of a microwave deal. If Oklahoma men are good enough, Oklahoma women too. I mean, if they get hot, you can beat anybody. So I wouldn't expect the OU men to be a Sweet 16 team. I think they would have to play really well 2 games in a row. That doesn't seem likely. They're more of a play well one game, play poorly the next. I think Jenni Berry Show's team, it'd be nice if they could somehow climb into a top 4 seed. Winning the Big 12 championship is going to help them. They've got some bad losses, which could knock them down below a 4 seed. But if you could be a 4 seed, get to play 2 games at Lloyd Noble Center, hey, everybody up. That'd be great. So they clearly could make the Sweet 16. I don't see them having Final Four talent, Final Four upside, but I do think the Sweet 16 is possible for the Sooner women.
You know, a good way for Oklahoma to get one of those home seeds in the women's tournament would be to go beat Texas another time in the Big 12 tournament, because that's definitely been a feather in their cap. But yeah, that non-conference loss to Southern, I'm not sure if the selection committee is going to be able to overlook that. That was a painful one, and it could really hang around their neck. But here's the thing. You mentioned the OU men. You know, the way that the men's tournament's gone, and again, the flattening of all these programs and seeing, you know, more teams with more capable rosters, you know, maybe somebody scores an upset in the first round and gives them a lower seeded opponent in the second round. And before you know it, they're on to the Sweet 16. I think that the tournament, if you're capable, and I think both these teams from OU are capable, if you're capable, you just never know how those matchups are going to line up. So, you know, if you can get through the first one, who knows? The road might open up a little bit because of all these upsets that have always been part of March, but now they seem like they've become even more. So, welcome to college basketball season, everyone. The time is here. Let's go. That's all the time we've got to talk this week, though. You can find our columns, videos, and podcasts at selloutcrowd.com, as well as barrytrammell.com and jenny-carlson.com. If you want our content at your fingertips, we've got you covered. We have an app. It's available for iPhone and Android. Download it today. If this happens to be your first time hearing or watching us, be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.